Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us on another webinar series from NSF. Today we've got some technical difficulty that's causing Katie to not be able to join us for just a moment, but we are going to get started anyways. I'll let our other presenter introduce himself. My name is Don McFarland. I'm with the Aerospace Business Unit of NSF International. I'm joined by Tony Giles, who's our Custom Audit Program Director and our resident cybersecurity expert at NSF. We're going to discuss cybersecurity and specifically the DFARS invocation for Nist Sp 800-171 and discuss some topics associated with that. As far as the formalities, at the end of this conference, you'll receive some confirmation emails of the recording once that's posted. As you've seen, or as you probably noticed, the recording is being captured, and we'll distribute that at the end of the conference to anybody that's interested, as well as a copy of the slide deck. And then we will have it posted on our website, available for review. If you have any questions, because you're muted, you'll have to use that chat function that's built into ReadyTalk, and then go from there. So with that, we'll get started. Tony, can you hear me?
Yes, Don, I can hear you okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you good. All right, we'll get started then. Just wanted to make sure before we went too much further. Perfect. So first we're going to start off with a quick poll. That poll is open for everybody to answer. It says, does your organization build products for the DoD either directly or indirectly, meaning through one or more customers? So if you're within the DoD supply chain, you would mark yes. If you're not, mark no. And if you just have no clue, go ahead and mark I don't know. We'll leave that open for just another moment. And I promise there's a method to the madness here. All right, 5 seconds left. 4, 3, 2, and 1. Perfect. So it looks like the vast majority of you are a part of that DoD supply chain, which is good. That's good to hear. So the next question is associated with Nist 800-171, and the question is, are you fully compliant to Nist 800-171? So we'll leave that open for just a few moments. Perfect. I'll give you another 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, and 1. Perfect. Thank you very much for that. So the overwhelming response is no, we are not compliant, and I'm not sure. And that's really the purpose for this call. We'll discuss when this requirement came to be and really why it's of interest for us today. Before we get to that, I want to just go through the brief agenda overview. We're going to talk a little bit about NSF and the Nist 800-171, and then Tony's going to start talking about the compliance advantage that NSF can offer, our process, and a potential roadmap to compliance. Because again, this is something that we have some expertise in-house for. So with that, we'll jump into the NSF. As you can see, we've got a number of business units, a number of service offerings that are available. From the system certification group under the ISR, International Strategic Registrations, food safety, sustainability, water quality, health sciences, etc. Within the ISR group specifically, we have a number of experts that are important to different segments of the industry, and Tony is the one that's going to talk to the cybersecurity portion of it. On the aerospace side, it's myself and Mike McRandall, who normally joins us for these, but he had a conflict today. He sends his apologies. So with that, we'll jump into the 800-171 portion of this. Couple key reminders or key timelines associated with this. As we know, this was introduced in DFARS 252.204-7012 in 2016. It actually came into effect in 2015, and then Rev 1 was released in October of 2016. And if you've read the directives, you would know that the compliance date was required by no later than December 31st of 2017. So at this point, an organization that accepts a government contract or a contract that includes a DFARS flowdown would have to have full compliance to Nist Sp 800-171 by no later than December 31st of 2017. And kind of what brought this up is a number of audits that I've done in the recent past. Since that deadline has come and gone, when I ask about their compliance program associated, I'm finding deer in the headlight type stares. And in the interest of not wanting our customers to be unaware of this requirement and frankly unaware of the importance of a robust contract review, we wanted to start with this, and then the next webinar we're going to do is about contract review, and you'll see more information about that in the near future. So again, with that in mind, we're going to talk about the NIST specific stuff here. The full compliance required by December 31st. If you haven't reported non-compliance within 30 days of the contract award, the government is going to assume that you comply. Those non-compliances have to be reported directly to the Chief Information Officer of the DoD. So it's not as if you can simply report it to your prime. The requirement is it has to go to the DoD CIO. And my guess is they're going to hold your feet to the fire. They're going to want you to be complying with the requirements. You're going to have to put together a pretty strong and compelling case associated with why you can't comply. We found a few instances in the recent past where the DFARS slowdown was invoked on a customer PO that didn't necessarily warrant it or require it. So that may be an option for you as well, to push back on your customer contracts and take exception to those particular clauses. But if you're continuing in that defense or DoD supply chain, you're going to have to comply with this requirement. We're going to talk to the basics of it, and then Tony's going to offer some guidance on what NSF can do to help a little bit further. As for the consequences of noncompliance, as it says, there will be consequences if you're caught. The DoD is assuming that you are good to go if you haven't reported. There's not a police associated with this at this point. There's no audit functions or anything associated with it. But if you are caught to be non-compliant, there will be consequences. Those could be in the form of a stop work order, loss of business, potential damages, or penalties associated with it as well, depending on the severity of it. So we are, it's pretty important that we comply with these types of requirements. Now, some of you may be thinking, I don't build tanks, and I'm using tanks figuratively here, but I'm not building defense widgets, so why in the world would I need to comply with this? Well, the acronym that you'll see within that invocation is for Controlled Unclassified Information. According to the National Archives, who is responsible for creating that classification, it's a broad category of information and includes a number of topics that are controlled and in the interest of national security or things like that. And it could be agricultural, meaning we've got some organics or some pesticides or something that could be weaponized in creating problems associated with our national security. It could be the IT vulnerabilities associated with certain organizations, or perhaps background checks, death records, et cetera, some way for somebody to enter the country illegally and start causing harm that way. It could be tax information, because we can, or bad people can find ways to create a liability, or excuse me, to create a way to shelter the money. So there's a number of different facets to controlled unclassified information, and it's up to you to create for you to identify where you fit into that. Again, if it's a contract slowdown, obviously you'll have to comply. If it's not in the contract, you still may be liable. We'll talk more about that here in just a minute. In a world where digital information is readily available, it becomes more important for us to ensure that that digital information is secure. Again, lots of industrial security regulations and a lot of cybersecurity regulations exist, but we've all seen these in headlines in the news, whether it's a breach of our credit card information or some hacking that exists from the Winter Olympic Games that are going on right now. There were some hacking efforts that were uncovered as part of that. Passwords from different websites, et cetera, et cetera. This stuff is reality. It exists every day. So it's something we need to be cognizant of. As far as the basics of 800-171, just a kind of a quick overview here, requires DoD contractors, including the small businesses, to provide adequate security to safeguard covered defense information that resides in or transits through their internal unclassified information systems from unauthorized access and disclosure. So you notice it says unclassified because classified stuff resides in a different system, the SIPRNet typically, and then the unclassified stuff is the stuff that we need to worry about controlling here. In addition to that, you'll notice that the term adequate security is used. It's a very generic and loosely controlled term associated with the invocation of it, but that's where 800-171 comes into play. They've defined adequate security as compliance to Nist Sp 800-171. The other facets here include rapidly reporting cyber incidents to the DoD through their website, making sure that they're investigated quickly and their action is taken against the data. Discover and isolate malicious software in connection with a reported cyber incident and submit that to the Cyber Crimes Center so that it again can be investigated and action can be taken. And then to preserve and protect images of all known affected information systems identified and all relevant monitoring or packet capture data for at least 90 days. And there's some additional requirements associated with it, but based on the feedback from the DoD Office of Small Business, this is stuff that's applicable to every organization or small business organizations, or excuse me, including small business organizations where the DFARS requirement has been invoked. So with that, we'll talk about what is adequate security. And I'm not going to get into the intricacies of what the standard requires, more so to introduce you to the standard and talk to some resources that exist. We could spend all day, if not longer, going through the specific nuances of 800-171 compliance. But for those that haven't looked at it, haven't cracked the document, and are now past due, this is a good chance for you to understand the basic outline of it and the requirements for compliance so that you can go do some homework and ensure that you're not in violation or breach of your contract requirement. With that, the 14 families of the NIST document are access control, ensuring that you don't allow people that can't have access or shouldn't have access to the information to have that. Media protection, awareness and training, personnel security, audit and accountability, physical protection, configuration management, risk assessments, identification and authentication, security assessment, incident response, system and communication protections, maintenance, and system and information integrity. Now, this seems like a very short list, very concise list, but I'll tell you this represents about 70 pages of the document and several hundred pages of guidance material. Now, I'm not saying that to overwhelm you or intimidate you, but there's a lot to this and a lot to the compliance to this standard that you probably need to be aware of. And whether you're the contracting official, the executive level management, or at a quality system level, this is certainly something that's going to be important to you because it's, again, a contract requirement, a contract flow down, and now it has some DoD backing as a part of that contract flow down. So it's something that you definitely want to follow up on and make sure you're compliant to. Some key points associated with this: there is no centrally managed database, so there's no way for you to register. It's a self-declaration associated with compliance. So that's the good news. In addition, we don't expect the DoD to audit all the suppliers. They're going to take a more risk-based approach, and it's going to be based on the type of products that you're doing, the risks that you present to the business or to the industry or to the warfighter, and it's likely going to include some risk assessment associated with the dollar value of the contract. Now, I will tell you, if DCMA is in the facility, this is probably going to be assessed by them. It's going to be talked about by them. It may be a little while before they get to that, but my guess is, my assumption is that the DCMA queues that are a part of your oversight are going to be looking into your compliance program associated with it. And again, where it's now past due, it's probably something that you want to be working towards and have a plan in place to show compliance or how you're getting to that very quickly. Even though the DoD is not going to be, at this time, they're not going to be expected to visit all suppliers or address this with all the suppliers, we cannot let this be an excuse to not comply. At the end of the day, it's still a contractual obligation, still a legal obligation for you to comply with this. Therefore, you need to determine how you can meet that requirement to ensure that you don't put undue risk on your business. We can expect a driver to come from the primes. In fact, I'd be surprised if you haven't seen this flow down from either your prime or the next level up from the customer that you're dealing with, because it's going to be invoked under that under that DFARS clause. It's going to be listed in the contract, but it may not be directly listed, meaning there may be a flow down within the contract that says the document such and such, that then has a list of all the RILES associated with DFARS compliance for that contract. So it's important to read the fine print, read all of the language associated with the contract that you're executing, and then make sure that you're complying to it. Within the primes, you could potentially see small suppliers at risk, and therefore there may be some additional oversight activity, or they may just pull business away from those small suppliers in the interest of ensuring compliance. System security plan requirements or details of how the requirements have been met may be identified in the contract, meaning there may be a flow down associated, or they may require you to fill out checklists. As an example, the ExoStar system, or EchoStar, depending on how you pronounce it, has a great tool, a robust tool that we'll talk about here in a little bit. But I've started seeing a request from the end user, from the prime, associated with sending that checklist to their subs to make sure that they're meeting the requirements. It hasn't been a global directive from anybody to my knowledge, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing that sort of invocation in the near future, again, from a risk-based perspective. Some additional key points here. Contractors currently are not required to submit the system security plan to the DoD, but they're required to have a system security plan in the interest of showing compliance to their system. And as a result, if you're questioned on it, you probably need to have some evidence to show that it's been done. Contracting officers requiring further activity may request verification statements or system security plans. Again, we plan on and currently seeing this compliance being managed through the contractual agreements. At least initially, it may become a more formal process in the future. And Tony will talk to some of the legislation that's associated with that, particularly from the science community and probably flowing across other industries or other government programs. Next point, ignorance is not an argument. Chances are this has been flowed down in a legal document or through a letter, and even though you may not have seen that letter because it went to the wrong contact, it's still something that's been flowed down. It's still legally invoked, and if you're within the government supply chain, it's probably invoked at some level, whether you've seen it directly or not. So it's certainly something that you want to be aware of and ensure that you're complying to. Don't make assumptions about reputable software or reputable companies being compliant. There's a lot of really, really powerful companies out there that are key players in their industry, and they haven't yet released a compliant software, or there's some configuration that has to be done for that software. As an example, and I just threw Microsoft out here because it's something that we see quite often, Microsoft 365 is not configured for NIST compliance out of the box. There are some modifications that can be made to it to get you closer to that NIST compliance level, but as it is configured as a stock item, it is generally not compliant. one of the good practices that we've seen is this FedRAMP moderate level rating is generally a good kind of baseline associated with outsourcing. So if the outsourced provider, the software service provider, has that rating associated with it, then it's probably going to meet it. Again, you're on the hook to make sure that it meets the 800-171 compliance program associated with your business and the level that you have. So the onus is on you as the supplier, as the contractor, to ensure that you're meeting those flow down requirements. A couple great resources that we found for NIST come from the Handbook 162, and again, this is a 170-page document that provides some excellent how-to information. There's the FIPS publication, there's NIST 853. All of these are excellent documents, readily available and free on the internet, free for the taking. By the way, the 800-171 Rev 1 document is also free and available on the internet to anybody. So you can go download that, read it as to your heart's content, and ensure that you have an understanding of it. If you're like me, some of the IT language is a little over my head, and that's where I have to consult some of the industry experts or some of the IT guys within our organization. The last resource that I've got listed here, and there are numerous others, but one of the more prevalent and popular one is the ExoStar database, or EchoStar, again, depending on how you pronounce it. They have a pretty cool assessment, includes some scoring, and it basically demonstrates that you've either met compliance or you've got an equivalent requirement or equivalent system that meets the intent, and it allows you to demonstrate compliance as part of your control plan pretty easily. Obviously, there's a cost associated with ExoStar, so if you don't have a subscription, you can sign up for it. But it's a pretty cool tool if you're interested in going through that. If you're dealing with some of the Tier 1, Tier 2 type companies, you have an ExoStar account, and chances are there's going to be in the near future a mandatory requirement for you to fill out this questionnaire and ensure compliance or demonstrate compliance to them, just so that they can show that they've done their due diligence with their supply chain. At this point, I'm not sure of any contractual, or I have not heard of any contractual or across the board type requirements for that, but I definitely can see that happening in the near future. So with that, I'm going to turn some time over to Tony to talk a little bit about the NSF programs and some other government programs associated with it. So go ahead, Tony.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate that. ExoStar is, and Don's already mentioned this, ExoStar is something we've seen in multiple NIST 800-171 compliance assessments and programs that we've been seeing that pass to staffing firms, to manufacturing firms. Don used the reference earlier, do you build tanks? We've dealt with organizations that build different types of military or Department of Defense equipment, such as helmets or maybe gloves. They've been passed down to or seen ExoStar reports. The ExoStar website does have some good resources on it. It also has a good list of the primes. So as Don mentioned, we can expect some of the primes will start to pass down and continue to pass down that 18-page security questionnaire. It does provide scoring based on how prepared the organization is to meet the NIST 800-171 requirements. There's so many different resources when we look at NIST 800-171, and there is the 32 Code of Federal Regulations and CUI, or Control of Unclassified Information Implementing Directive. The DFARS, as Don has already highlighted, 252.204-7012 is now requiring NIST 800-171 CUI requirements. Currently, the standard, there's no third-party verification currently with the standard, but it's something that organizations are being asked to how they meet or can comply. I did see a question come up that asked about, I thought the requirement was for a POAM or an SSP. That's accurate. The requirement does ask for a POAM, Plan of Action and Milestones. plan of action and milestones, which is 3.12.2 in the 800-171 program and the SSP, 3.12.4. The good thing with 3.12.4, system security plans are fairly robust. They involve multiple different levels. They involve the system boundaries, system environments, the operating system. So we want to take all that into consideration when we develop an SSP or a system security plan. But that's a lot of times what's requested of organizations is to provide their SSP to their contractor. We continue to look at FISMA and FedRAMP, the Federal Information Systems Modernization Act. Numerous agencies already have this in place. They understand the U.S. is a prime target for data breaches, and it's a constant target of nation countries that look to try to exploit different systems. There's multiple new contracts that may require consulting or implementation assistance. We have a track record of putting good systems in place, whether it be ISO 27001, ISO 20000, NIST 800-88, or NIST 800-171 in place, and helping organizations achieve information security goals and objectives. We're looking for ways that we can help with the National Defense Authorization Act, the critical infrastructure owned by the military, and the need to evaluate for potential vulnerabilities. We're looking to be a partner to help evaluate activities, provide a third-party perspective, as well as the NIST framework, recent drafts of NIST, recent executive orders. That we've seen this as a constant focus and something organizations have always asked us about as far as implementing good and robust security controls. We're going to continue to advance, and we're going to look at the NSF and NIST compliance advantage. NSF organizationally is a testing, inspection, and certification firm. You saw the opening slide. There's many different industries that we partake in and support. When you look at us being classified as in testing, inspection, and certification, NSF is proficient in writing standards. This focuses on food, drinking water, indoor air, dietary supplements. There's testing of products, certification, auditing, consulting, and training. And where we focus from NIST's perspective and how we support cybersecurity or information security management systems, we focus this through custom standards, custom security protocols that are developed. We focus this through certification or verification statements, opportunities for us to evaluate a management system and understand the security controls that you have in place. We conduct audits. We conduct audits globally on information security management systems, and we provide consulting as a supportive measure for organizations that need help in consulting. Consulting can range from awareness and training to system security, to physical and environmental security, to physical security of the organization. Are there controls that safeguard data that might be locked into file cabinets in an open room? Are there controls in place to prevent people from just accessing the facility? As well as training and developing training and education programs and supporting security and awareness and training education programs is so important. We have to continue to communicate and educate teams on the importance of information security programs. We are a group, and I say this, I say small group, but we focus on really compliance to data security systems. We conduct research. We do consulting, implementation, development, and training. There's many similarities that we've seen and that we draw on our experience between ISO 27001 and NIST 800-171. When you look at ISO 27001, there is 114 security controls, and they fall all within the scope of what's called Annex A. When you look at NIST 800-171, there's 110 security controls, and they all fall within a scope of something called Appendix D. There's many similarities. They're mapped out throughout the NIST 800-171 Appendix D standard, or guideline, but they're mapped out and they show the reference to ISO 27001 security controls. If you're an organization that already has an ISO 27001 program in place, I always suggest looking at that cross-reference in the NIST standard to understand what controls are being met and what controls aren't being met. One of the differences is ISO 27001 looks for more of a disaster recovery business continuity plan. NIST 800-171 looks for more backup. They're not as specific as a business continuity or disaster recovery plan. We've recently submitted comments on the NIST Critical Infrastructure Framework version 1.1. It's draft 2. They've extended some comments from April through June for 800-171 implementation, so we'll be working on commenting on that. We continue to provide feedback on security programs, working on the Hill with congressional teams or the Senate teams to provide cybersecurity awareness. We really feel and we really focus on the cybersecurity and awareness. We want to make sure teams and individuals within the organization are always made aware of cybersecurity initiatives. We want to not just make the standard or make cybersecurity about IT, but we want to make it about the organization as a whole. And I think that's really what 800-171 or ISO 27001 is trying to accomplish as well. They're really focused on procedural and policy development as well as staff development. I said we were a smaller group, but we do have a very focused group. We've performed assessments to 800-171, 800-88, which is media disposal for cryptographic erasure, 800-53, ISO 27001, 20000, cloud and hybrid IT, as well as many custom security programs. We've had organizations ask us about CAS-T coupled with ISO 27001, or we've had organizations ask us for more of a hybrid customized approach looking at 800-171, ISO 27000, and maybe an encryption protocol or a FIPS validated encryption program. We've conducted over 1,000 audits globally, and we really understand how risk-based security programs are built and maintained. This is something we really focus in on. I'll talk a little bit later about the risk assessment process, but we do put a lot of input and effort into making sure your organization develops a risk-based security program. So we always support, and one of the things we always support is a security control review. That's our first step in developing our path forward. We look at the guidelines or the Appendix D of the NIST controls. That's our starting point, and we evaluate and we build on those controls. Many controls organizations already have in place. They may not have it documented or they may not have it noted, but we want to identify those controls because it gives us areas to focus on of controls that we need to further evaluate or further support on implementing. This is the structure that we use for the decision-making process. I talked on the earlier slide about risk assessment and risk development. When we do the guideline and the starting point for a security control review, we look at controls that are already implemented, and then we look at controls that aren't necessarily implemented or need development. We focus on then the next step being controls that aren't implemented. We build those into a risk assessment for the organization. The risk assessment is built to include probability, impact, and then it scales out and provides a residual risk, or what's the remaining risk. It allows organizations to prioritize for their POAM or plan of actions and milestones. It allows organizations to better prioritize based on risk. And of course, there's always a prioritization that could be associated with cost as well. But we really like to use the risk framework following not implemented controls. And we work with customers to identify main concerns. And that's our main concerns are our system security plans and plan of action and milestones. But I really am comfortable building out plan of action and milestones using a risk-based approach. I think it adds more value to the organization, and it allows them to better classify what they want to focus on first. We also know that there's There is a guide for applying risk management framework offered through NIST. It's NIST 837R1. That's also an opportunity for organizations to look at ways that they can provide a risk management framework. We're going to continue to move into the NSF process. And Don talked about this earlier in the presentation, the NIST CUI categorization and classification. We've included the links in the presentation. We start understanding what category the organization falls in. We've heard consulting firms or staffing firms. We have manufacturers. So you have organizations that might fall under a MFC categorization. That would be a manufacturing firm categorization. We have organizations that fall under CUI, control of technical information. This could be any kind of data. It could be PII, personally identifiable information. That would fall under the privacy category. There's multiple NIST CUI categories, and from the archives page, there's multiple drill downs that we can further go into to look at each of those categories. This is a page you can spend significant amount of time on looking at, just drilling down to identify what categorization might best fit your organizational needs. When doing that, NSF really wants to support a start-to-finish service offering and a start-to-finish approach on development and implementation. We like to start with an on-site gap assessment to understand where the organization is at with NIST 800-171 controls and Appendix D. The reason we do this is twofold. It gives us the opportunity to understand what controls the organization already has in place, and it gives us the opportunity to understand what controls the organization doesn't have in place. With that being said, we really can then focus on controls that the organization doesn't have in place, and then scale and build our plan, system security plans, build our POAM and our risk assessment around not implemented controls. So that's where our real focus is and when we start. We want to start there because we don't just want to provide here's a stack of documentation, let's implement the documentation. We want a customized approach that's best fit for your business. We then build a security platform, and this is done using software. In some cases, it's done using the building documentation. This might be the build of a incident response policy or an incident response management system. This could be in place to meet certain DFARS requirements for cyber incident reporting. And from there, we then verify the control, the implementation, the effectiveness. We verify when the planned events are, when you plan to fully implement the risk treatment or risk mitigation platform that you'll put in place from the risk assessment. And then we continue to evaluate for the effectiveness of those implementations. And the process to security reviews, we try to keep it very simple and very straightforward for organizations. As I said earlier, we start with a gap assessment, and we build the system security plan. It's 3.12.4 in NIST 800-171 Appendix D for your security requirement. We build the risk assessment. We build the risk assessment, we build the system security plan through the gap assessment evaluation. So we understand controls that are or are not implemented. We want to identify those control gaps. We communicate throughout this process with the team, with the organization. We do formal wrap-up and close-up meetings at the end of assessments, whether they're on site or whether they're done remotely. And we do some work remote and we do some work on site. A lot of the development work is done remotely. We provide documentation, we provide assessments, then we will communicate that within the organization to leadership within the organization who can pass this down to the teams. And that's where we focus on closing gaps. We focus on controls that aren't in place. We always want to keep in mind NIST is a guideline. So I saw the question earlier, POAMs and SSPs are required. Absolutely, those are required, but we keep in mind that NIST is a guideline. There might be some controls that don't necessarily get implemented within the organization, but we need to be mindful that those controls were looked at. We may deem them as a low-risk control, so we will pivot away from actually implementing that type of, or pivot away from implementing a system to better manage that control. Some controls take longer to implement than others. Many multi-factor, two-factor authentication controls to put in place or potential configuration items to put in place can take longer than something along a physical and environmental security control that could include better locking of doors or a more managed key system for the organization. But we also always like to know what you already have, and we do that by initially conducting the gap assessment. Then we like to document and verify. The documentation, it's for your organization to continue to communicate, continue to provide a resource to the team. We document plan of actions and milestones. We want to make sure that those are in line with the organization, what can be implemented and what may take longer time frames to implement. And we like to show evidence of completion. This is through verification statements. This is through the use of a system security plan or a completed verification assessment report. And we always use a team. We like to use a team for the NIST assessments. It breaks up good. It allows us to focus on configuration controls. We have one team member that may focus more on configuration, one team member that might focus on physical and environmental security, and another team member that might focus on risk. We then holistically pull all that together and provide the organization with the overall system security review with all the different inputs from the team members. So there is all one input, one review as the end result. We look at our roadmap to compliance. We always build our process to be seamless and easy for organizations. That's why we focus on custom security assessments with NIST as a guideline or ISO as a guideline. We always provide a proposal for the work and scope of work. This is done with the prospect or with the organization. We want to make sure the proposal is going to meet your needs. The proposal will be accepted. Project planning is then initiated. All organizations are given a project plan from proposal acceptance. We then start to work and develop the gap assessment. For planning and completion, we look at building and providing our documentation toolkit. We focus again on the two main items, that system security plans and plan of actions and milestones. And we really understand that implementing NIST 800-171 for your large primes or organizations of significant size, Fortune 500 companies, they have the budget and the resources. We want to make sure that smaller organizations are able to implement and control security initiatives as well. So we really want to focus on, and we really do understand many different needs, whether the organization is large scale or a smaller scale business. We think the primes are really looking at, when they're looking at their supply base contractually, they're going to look at how those suppliers have their smaller suppliers been able to implement certain security controls. We've seen some of the larger breaches throughout history really happen through a open supply base or an unsegmented network. We then like the verification. We conduct a verification to fully implemented 800-171 controls, and we provide a verification statement. This is through audit reports as well as documentation that's provided to the organization and customer. We want to continue to advance security. Don gave a very good overview initially, but we continue to see top-level leaders very concerned about cyber threats. There's been so many studies on risk reduction and how ISO or NIST standards can incorporate elements of risk requirements to conduct risk assessments, brand protection for organizations, value creation, and stronger cybersecurity programs can build new relationships with organizations. The average cost of a breach to an organization continues to go up, and the last time that we were really researching this currently stood about $4 million. It's $158 per record. And a lot of the breaches that happen are malicious attacks that cost more to remediate than it does to put more of a control plan in place. And when we say this, it's education and training. We've seen the rise in phishing attacks through email, whether it's fake parking tickets or fake POs, but more and more organizations are being targeted for phishing attacks. This is giving system-level access or allowing unauthorized access potentially into your system. So it's an education and awareness around phishing attacks that might prevent a breach, it's easier to educate than it is to remediate following that breach. And as Don talked about, be mindful of upcoming deadlines. There's the 800-171 deadline. We are past December 31st. There's upcoming deadlines with General Data Protection Regulation. That enforcement is coming for May 25th of 2018. It's really focusing on PII, personally identifiable information within organizations, and ISO 27001, the customer contracts. We're always going to see this continue to expand throughout the customer contract process. With that being said, we will look at the review, and Don, I don't know if you want to review and open it up for any questions, sir.
Yeah, absolutely, Tony. I want to thank you for joining us and putting your expertise into the slides. Obviously, this is right up Tony's alley, so we'd certainly appreciate him taking time to come share that expertise with us. For those that haven't, there's a chat function. If you have questions, feel free to enter those in there. I want to go over two things real quick before we get to that. Go ahead and start plugging your questions in while I'm going through this. So the slide you're looking at now has our contact information. Tony is the expert for the cybersecurity programs here at NSF. And then you see my contact information under the aerospace side. Feel free to email us at any time if you would like some additional follow-up or some additional questions. And as I mentioned early on, there will be an email that comes out with a copy of the presentation as well as a link to the recorded webinar that's available on our website. On the left side of this, you'll see a reference to the ASQ World Conference. If you're going to be in the area, please feel free to stop by and chat with us. We're at booth 313, and we'd be happy to talk with you about some options or any needs that you may have. Or if unofficially you're looking to maybe expand your career into that of a third-party auditor, we can probably have some dialogue surrounding that as well. The other item I wanted to cover was surrounding our next webinar. And as I alluded to at the beginning, the next topic is going to be on the contract review / customer interface activities. So we're going to focus on that. Save the date. Right now it's set for March 16 March. And it looks like 1 p.m. Eastern is the tentative time. Katie's going to get a mailer out in the near future to all of our ISO and QMS and AS clients so that you can accept that or just get on the mailing list, and then we can email you the recorded link afterwards. So with that, we'll go through some of these questions, and Tony, I may have to tap into your expertise for a couple of them here. The first one comes from Brett, says, if your organization typically deals with commercial off-the-shelf items, I understand there is an exemption. Is this correct? Tony, your thoughts on that?
I haven't seen many exemptions come across. I've seen more boiled down requirements as they relate to system security plans and plan of action and milestones. I could follow up on an exact exemption as it relates to commercial off-the-shelf. The other, I think we'll see it and we'll look at how the contract is worded as it relates to security requirements or the DFAR requirement. It might be specific to the contractor to have compliance to the DFARS through their supplier agreement.
Yeah, I would agree. The language that I've seen historically has been standard boilerplate language, if you will, and doesn't really provide any exceptions or exclusion opportunity. In the instance that we found for some of the COTS items, it was a supplier that was reselling or distributing some adhesives, and they took exception to that with their prime or with their customer, and the customer accepted that exception, that contract exception. So that may be an option if you've got a relationship with your customer where you can push back. But if at the end of the day it's a required flow down invoked, then it's going to be up to you to determine how your SSP meets the intent, meets the requirements of the DFARS standard as well as the 800-171 document.
Absolutely, Don. And that SSP, we really want to make sure includes the full system environment. It can be a very limited system environment, and that's acceptable. They just want to make sure that there's a system security plan in place for organizations.
Good. So our next question comes from Ken. It says, how do we engage with NSF to initiate the security review? Tony, it looks like you're following up on that, but if you want to give an overview for anybody else that's interested.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a two-part question. So how do you engage with NSF? Please contact myself or Don. Either one of us is happy to help and start to look at the process with anybody. And what do we need to have ready, or what should organizations have ready to begin a security review or a gap analysis? We always tell organizations to have ready really an open door and an open mind when we show up. We want to come in, we want to start to conduct the gap assessment, we want to look at potentially already developed documentation as well as your physical and environmental security. From there, that allows us to start to assess the organization's preparedness to 800-171 through the Appendix D controls assessment. So we're going to look at that security controls